My name is Joe Morgan. I am the VP of Cloud at Virtuoso, but my start into the data center world actually came from my parents' web hosting company. So my parents were web developers, and they let me manage the server for them. And so I started out with a single server co-located in a local data center. I kind of fell in love with the data center world and data center scene. I'd been a managed service provider before that. And so I decided I'd do it again. So I bought another server, co-located it, went online to some web hosting forums and offered it as a bare metal, or at the time we called it dedicated server. And Joe's Data Center kind of began. And so I ran Joe's Data Center for around 13 years. I grew it from strictly co-location in another company's facility to owning and operating my own facility and having my own 24/7 staff, to eventually buying a building and building it out as a data center and getting additional locations in California. Our main location was in Kansas City, of course, and then we also had some rack space in New York. I was really big into peering. I was looking through the agenda, and I wish I could have seen the session before mine, because it was supposed to be about peering, but I was very heavily into network peering. I would get connections across the U.S. and into Frankfurt, Germany, to do peering. So I transitioned from MSP to CSP, and now I'm at Virtuoso, and we'll get it a little bit more about that here in a minute. But first, I want to start talking about some just general trends and things that I've seen in the market, and then I'm specifically going to be talking to you about the differences between kind of the global market and the local market, at least from my perspective. So, the evolution of the hosting industry has gone as Antonio and I would talk about, it's been choppy. It's been back and forth. And what I mean by that is there's been this trend to where new technology emerges at the local data center. And then that co-location or that hosting provider is able to kind of test bed and become the place where this stuff gets figured out. And then the global providers come in and they offer consolidation of because they get buying power, they get the ability to do things at scale. And most of the time, there's companies that want to be able to consume and buy these resources and get a consistent experience anywhere they might need to be able to provide it. And so for a long time, the industry trend has been that we're moving away from on-prem and hosted, and we're going more towards cloud, with edge solutions really only being for the very specific workloads that are necessary there. In fact, Gartner recently actually took repatriation of cloud resources out of the cloud and back on premise as being something that they don't foresee happening anymore. Now the expected trend is that we're going to be essentially these mega clouds that everybody hosts with. Africa is a very interesting region because it hasn't been penetrated very much right now. So it's unique in that it's still heavily dominated by a lot of smaller data centers and players, but the hyperscaler, the large global providers, are definitely trying to penetrate and get into that market. Now, every time they think that the local data center is gone and dead, there is some type of industry trend that seems to change that. And what I mean by that is when blockchain became very popular and Bitcoin was at its kind of peak, the local data center suddenly got a big influx of new life into it because it required new technology to be deployed. Racks had to be reconfigured. Power infrastructure had to be upgraded. People were wanting to build their own mining rigs and put it in a local data center. And so then that trend kind of shifted away. Now we've got machine learning and AI, and that's starting to come back again. The requirements for these high-end GPU processing units with lots of power, the large facilities just aren't designed for it, or there's not enough facilities built out for the demand. And so these local data centers are starting to get life kind of brought back to them a little bit. So I don't know that I necessarily agree with what Gartner's seeing, but I think that as the industry continues to fluctuate and new technology comes out and new trends happen, I think the local data center will always serve to catering to whatever that specific new use case is. But let's talk a little bit about what, from a consumer standpoint, what are the trade-offs of going with a local provider versus a global provider? And like, what can you expect from that and what differences there will be? And I always like this graph because it does a really good job of explaining if you were going to pick and choose what you would want from a company, like where you want to sit inside of that triangle, you're always going to be giving and taking, right? So if you go closer to the bottom left on the lower price, you're giving up support and you're giving up some potentially large features. If you go more feature rich, then you're giving up on price and you're giving up on support and so on. And so, as a consumer, you basically have to pick and choose where you want to fit and what type of service and quality you want to get from the company that you're going to do business with. So if you're buying from a global provider, what is the expectation? The expectation is that a global provider, the standard, is going to have great features, great pricing, great support. But that's not always the reality, right? And we just saw on that triangle that I showed a second ago that you can't do all of those. You have to kind of pick and choose where you want. So the reality becomes that global provider is commoditizing it in such a way that, yeah, they can be a technology leader and they can give you lots of features. And most of the time, those features are going to be presented to you in a way that you can consume without interaction from them. That's one of the ways that they get these economies of scale. But you're not going to get very good customer service and support from that, right? The NIST definition for cloud computing specifically says that it doesn't even count as being cloud computing unless you can buy, consume, deploy without any interaction from the data center. So you essentially should be able to self-service everything that you need. And the global providers are really good at this, right? Because they've got the engineers, they've got the people who can design the technology to make it super easy to consume from that standpoint. But that's not necessarily the best for a small consumer. That works really great when you've got trained staff who understand that platform and just want to be able to mass deploy. But if you're a smaller service provider or you're a smaller business and you need some hand holding or you have some questions or you want a more one-on-one experience, that is not something that you're going to be able to get from a global provider. That's just not how they're tooled, and it doesn't fit into that triangle. In that, they're definitely heavily featured focused, and so that means, of course, that they're pulling away from both price and from customer service. And I think everybody would probably agree with me on the customer service standpoint. I think that everybody understands that when you consume from Microsoft or Amazon, that the customer service experience just isn't going to be as good. The pricing is one that is interesting because the cloud was always sold as being a product offering that you get the lowest price because you pay for what you consume. They even bill you hourly. And that's not actually what ended up happening. What ended up happening is, yes, they did go and take each individual resource. They did figure out a price for those resources and bill hourly, but they have increased the price so much on this comparatively to what you could buy from a local provider that it's actually much, much more expensive. And the solution they end up coming up with is, redesign your workload so that it doesn't consume as much so that your cost goes down. But that's really not actually lowering pricing. That is just essentially converting the burden onto you as a user of trying to consume only the necessary amounts because you're going to get charged so much. And, as that last session was about peering, I wish I could have saw it. That's another place where they have really, I think, tried to leverage their size and scale. It used to be, in my data center business, we could go and peer with anybody anywhere. We would run a cable, gave us lower latency. We would get the cost benefit of us being able to have bandwidth go between us providers directly. And the hyperscalers now controlling, I think, like 83% of the entire infrastructure market, they've basically said we've got so much market share that we don't need to peer anymore. In fact, we're going to charge a ton for egress, which basically is locking the customer base in and making it impossible for them to move away. But it also is making, they actually say you have to pay to peer with us. So this is kind of crazy. But we'll get in a little bit more about that here in a bit. But I do want to move on here. So I talked a lot about what it's like buying from that global provider and the fact that you're not going to get as good a price and support. But what about buying from that local provider? So they're probably not going to have all of the feature sets to one match the hyperscalers. But I would ask you to really question whether or not you use all of the features that they offer to justify that extra expense and that extra difficulty in using it without having anybody there to help you with it, without having that customer service. I think most of the time, the local provider can actually give you the base features that you need while still then giving you pricing that matches what your local region is. I know when I owned a data center, I didn't compete on a global market. I competed with the other local data centers around me. So my pricing was very much based on the cost of the employment in that local region, what we could buy our power for. We were fortunate to have a very low power rate where I was at, and this, it caused our pricing to drop, and we had to be more competitive with our other local providers. And so the consumer ended up getting a much better product from us. And then, of course, because we're that local provider, we had to provide great support, right? There was always a phone you could call. If it wasn't me picking up, it was one of my techs, and we were there to help you because our success was directly tied to our customer success as well. So in the end, if I had to have one takeaway for this first section of my presentation, it would be to buy local. I think that you're going to get everything you need, and in the end, I think you're going to end up having a better experience, unless you specifically need one of those high-end features that only the global providers can provide. But let's spend a little time talking about, in general, what's happening in the industry. And I spoke about this a little bit earlier, which is that, Amazon, Microsoft, Google, they now control 83% of the entire infrastructure market between those three. So that consolidation is driving a huge changes in the industry. And I spoke about it a little bit, but I want to dive a little bit deeper into what the end goal becomes. Because as those providers take more and more of the market share, and believe me, they're trying to go into any emerging market, they are essentially fixing and controlling what the pricing is, and they are stifling innovation in these other providers as well. So I did a pretty in-depth cost analysis between the three top hyperscalers, Amazon, Microsoft, and Google, and I looked at what it would cost to buy just a VM, an instance, from each one of them on the same hardware tier in the same region. And what I found is the pricing between the three of them was less than 1% different. Excuse me. And so what that tells me is that they've already started to fix the market. They control the mass majority of it. They are fixing the price. They're raising that price, and they're making it to where it's impossible for people to move away from them. So that consolidation is already happened. And the end result is that they are actually building and buying the physical infrastructure of the internet in such a way that it's going to make it impossible for any local provider to compete long term. I was at a conference recently in Canada, and I was speaking to a financing company who finances the bills of co-location data centers. And they told me that when they would go to build a new data center, they would go and they'd say, hey, we need a list of all of the customers who have signed contracts and agreed to buy services from this data center once it's built. And they said, then we would finance based on those contracts. So we would use those as collateral for the loan. And I said, oh, so you probably have hundreds, if not thousands, of different contracts that you have to use. And he said, no, not anymore. He said, now when we go to do a new data center build, it's typically one contract that we finance the entire project on, because they're basically building these co-location facilities, even these what would be normally considered carrier neutral facilities, for one customer. It's going to be, one of the people on the right side of this slide that I've got up on the screen right now. So the physical infrastructure of the internet is being changed and consolidated, and companies like mine, where I started one server at a time, just growing it based on the need and demand, it's going to be impossible because that barrier to entry is going to be too high. You're not going to be able to peer. You're not going to be able to provide the same level of services. The long-term end result of the consolidation in this market is going to cause, there to be a situation in which you're never going to be able to get that level of customer service that you or the price that you should for those resources. So my question is this really the future that we want? Do we want to be in a situation where the internet, which has always been the place that's open and free for anybody to be able to go and create a new business, to be controlled by this monopoly? This is something that keeps me up at night. It really does. I think this is very scary, and I hope that this resonates with somebody here and that they agree with me. And so let's take a look about how it should work. In theory, the hyperscaler model should be that they create this cloud, and then the MSP, who's really the industry expert who's helping deploy and manage these resources, sits in the middle and they resell this, and then they provide that local service and support to the end user. So this might seem like the perfect scenario, right? Because then the MSP, who is basically hired as the expert for whatever the end customer is, can sit and they can offer that better customer service experience while being able to get the flexibility and scale of the hyperscaler cloud on the back end. And so there's a couple problems with this that should be obvious right off the bat. One is the MSP doesn't have any margin left, because the hyperscalers are already so expensive that the MSP can sell the services that they're offering, the actual migration of the workloads, going in and doing cybersecurity analysis or optimizing the workloads to get the best spend, but they're not really able to make money on the hosting itself. Everybody can go to AWS's website and pull their price list, right? So the MSP has a very hard time, selling it as a bundled solution with the hosting included. They're mostly just going and saying, hey, we'll manage this workload for you and we'll charge you for the service work for it. But this is actually taking a huge wallet share from the MSPs, because traditionally when they were doing work for companies on site, on premise, they were helping facilitate selling the equipment. They were having to maintain it and keep it running. And so these were all things that allowed them to make money on the physical infrastructure sale, but they also made money on the residually on the maintenance and upkeep with stuff that now, once it gets moved to the cloud, they pretty much are getting boxed out completely. And so the end result ends up being that the MSP who's sitting in the middle is getting circumvented by the actual infrastructure of the cloud, right? And then the hyperscalers are always looking at the industry trends and saying, hey, what software solutions can we design to target more of that end user and circumvent that MSP altogether, right? So the SaaS offerings that are existing in the cloud marketplaces right now are essentially moving that MSP away. And then, as I talked about earlier, so the only way you can get good customer service from one of these clouds as an end user, because you don't understand the complexity of the cloud, it's just too much and changes too rapidly, you have to rely on these experts, is that the MSP was the only way to provide that. That was the only expert you could go to, because going direct to one of the clouds as an end user just isn't even feasible. And so those MSPs are getting squeezed and they're getting pushed out. And so they're actually cannibalizing the very customer base, the MSPs, that are bringing the end user workloads in and basically pushing them out completely. And so the hyperscaler model, in my opinion, is not long-term in the best interest of the end user. And so what can you do about this? And the conclusion I came to at the end of the first section was that you should, as a consumer, whether you're an MSP or you're an end user, you should try to buy local, right? It's really important. This is something that I think everybody understands when you think about things like food production or supporting your local business, but they don't think about it as much when it comes to cloud infrastructure and data center infrastructure. And I think that's something that people should start to stop and really consider and think about. Is this something where my buying power as an end user consumer should be able to also do that for the physical infrastructure of the internet, for the local data center providers and as well. And is this in my best interest long term? Which of course I think it is. So your ability to go and buy it is your vote. Democratization of the internet is really important to me. Democratization is about giving everybody an equal playing field to be able to compete. It's about giving everybody an equal playing field to be able to go and consume. And I think the only way that we can do that is by supporting those local providers. So my second takeaway for the second section is, once again, buy local. And then the last thing I want to talk about is, what is Virtuoso doing to help? And why would, obviously, if you've listened to this so far for the last 20 minutes or so that I've been talking, you might go, okay, Joe, well, you went from owning your own local data center to going and working for a global company like Virtuoso. So why would you do that? Like, what would make somebody who's obviously so interested in this do something like that? And what happened is I was sitting one day and I was talking to a good friend of mine, and I asked myself, with all the experience of having done this for 13 years, and I really enjoyed running a local data center, if I was going to start again today, would I be successful? Could I even do it? And the answer was no. The barrier to entry is too hard. The hyperscalers are, it's 83% this year. It'll be probably high 80s, if not 90% next year. I was trying to convert my local co-location and bare metal server data center into more cloud focused. I was actually using Virtuoso software to do so, which is how I got to know them. But I thought, the long term and the industry trend is going away from me as a local provider. And so I thought there's got to be a better way, and there's got to be a way that we can compete and fight back against this. And so I sold my company and came on board with Virtuoso as VP of Cloud to try to fix this situation specifically. And what I wanted to do is I wanted to, instead of us building a cloud and going and competing and say, hey, we're another DigitalOcean, or we're another OVH cloud, or we're another AWS alternative, instead I wanted to say, hey, look, let's instead connect local MSPs, and this is a cloud built specifically for service providers, by service providers. So I want to connect a local MSP to a local data center infrastructure provider. So in the same way that Uber came and said, hey, we can't compete against the cab industry by buying a bunch of physical cabs and hiring drivers and training them in every place that we want to offer our service. Instead, what they did is they said, hey, let's actually empower people with what is their largest asset, because most people don't even own a house anymore. The car would be the biggest asset that they might own. And so they said, let's empower people to take their car and make money off of it and become almost like small entrepreneurs themselves. And so I want to do the same thing for the local data center provider who's got this asset. They've got these local expertise, and they are already in that region providing good customer service and low regional pricing. And so I want to take Virtuoso Cloud and use our software, which is based on industry standards like OpenStack. And I want to say, hey, look, local data center, join our cloud as part of our, let's call it a federation. Let's put our software for our managed cloud, infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, application as a service, whatever it may be. We have software to provide all of those things in your local data center, and then let's let you start being the driver for our cloud. And then on the back end, we go, okay, now that MSP who's providing those services to those end users, they have the ability to actually purchase and consume from that local data center, and then we become the in-between between them and that local provider, so that they have consistency. They have one brand that they can go and learn how the platform works, and they can go and they can pick and choose where they want to consume their workloads from, like they would from any hyperscaler cloud, except that at each one of those, when they actually go to deploy, they're buying it from a local provider. And so it's kind of the best of both worlds. And we're kind of trying to do something a little bit different, which is do something that's sustainable long-term for service providers. We don't sell directly to end users. We're not building these software as a service solutions to try to put our MSPs out of business. Instead, we basically banked our entire model on the MSP has to be successful because they're the only ways that we get consumption on our cloud. They're buying from these local service providers, which means these local service providers and data centers have to be successful, or we don't have any infrastructure to sell. So we're basically trying to create a shared economy model that is long-term sustainable by being that in between between the managed service provider servicing the end users and that cloud service provider, the CSP, who's servicing the infrastructure side of things. And it's also really exciting because it's giving people an opportunity as a service provider to pick and choose where you want to fit inside of this, right? So you can start out more as a managed provider, reselling the resources from one of our other providers, and you can grow all the way to a point like I did, where I physically started building and growing data center infrastructure and providing it and becoming a data center. And so this gets back to that thing that was made it so passionate for me, which was that, hey, maybe this is actually an opportunity where we can consume and buy and support and eventually get to the point where I would be able to start again and I would be able to compete and I would have the same feature sets that I'd be able to offer because Virtuoso is providing that modern, up-to-date, industry standard software solution, right? And I would be able to start small because I can start just by consuming and selling and providing good support to the end users, but I could grow all the way into infrastructure as well because I actually get paid for the consumption on my infrastructure as part of this, kind of global but local cloud, right? So we're trying to kind of merge those two together in a way that is best for everybody in the industry. And so the end goal, of course, should be Virtuoso is just a small link in the chain, whereas the client buys from that local MSP. They provide the great customer service, the great support, but we just become a link between that local MSP and that infrastructure provider, right? So the real key players here is not Virtuoso. It's really the clients, the local MSPs, and the infrastructure providers. And that should be the end goal here. And I think that's the best for everybody in the industry. And so that hyperscaler model that I talked about earlier, which is basically just cannibalization of those MSPs, which the end result is not going to be the best for anybody. We talked about that quite a bit already. Instead becomes the perfect ecosystem of a bunch of Virtuoso partner infrastructure locations, the local MSP key to the end user workload. They get margin. In fact, we guarantee margin on our platform by baking it in such a way that they can resell it and always be guaranteed to make residual income off of it. Remember, that was one of those things that I said was kind of the dream for the MSP that got pulled out from underneath them. And we don't provide services to those end users. So that means that they are always going to be on a platform that is designed and built for them to be successful on. And we actually sell through distribution partners. And so those distributor partners also contribute to that MSP being able to buy and consume in their local currency from a local distributor. And so it kind of fits that bigger model of buy local, which again, this is the third section and the last section of my presentation here. That's my end result. Buy local, empower your local providers. I think that in general, this will provide a much better long-term sustainable ecosystem, and we can actually give back to the next generation the same thing that we got out of the internet, which is a place where they can be successful and grow, because I don't see how with the monopolies, how they're going to give those same opportunities that we had before. So if you are interested in learning more about this and what I'm doing with Virtuoso, feel free to go to our website and check out more about our cloud. If you go to the main Virtuoso website, you'll see anything that has to do with the Virtuoso hybrid cloud is this particular offering that I'm talking about. We do have a promotion going where you can get a month free in a $250 credit so that you have an opportunity to just get in there, play around, see it. Obviously, being the one that kind of started this cloud model, I would love to have this conversation and continue to talk about this. So if this is something that interests you, please get a hold of me and let's continue the conversation. But otherwise, that's all I've got. I appreciate the time that I've been given here today. And I don't know if you all have time or the ability, but I'd be more than happy to answer some questions as well.
One of the questions is, so just about how you can connect actually different data centers to the hypercloud. How does it work? So that means, as a company here, I can have hardware and the cloud stack, the Virtuoso cloud installed. Then I can have it as a service. Okay, I mean, I can start the reselling without any or with low budget. Initial budget?
Yes. Yeah, so essentially the way it works is we have a hosted control panel that operates the actual interface where the MSP can register, log in, and then they see all the regions, locations that we have there. The regions and locations that we've got would be a local provider, and we actually provide our software and then pay them for the consumption on their physical infrastructure. So the local data center, who becomes a part of our cloud, we actually facilitate giving them the full software stack. They provide the hardware, and then we pay them for the consumption based on the end users and the platform on their data center infrastructure.
Okay, so that means in few words, I can put my hardware on sale, like enter, put it the resources, they can be sold and used by another customer. And on the other side, I also use partner resources and capacities to sell in my own to my own customers.
That's correct, and it gives you the ability to also resell the other locations and regions so that you can now become more of a global provider to your customers as well. So if before you only had one region, one location, you might have customers that say, hey, I really want to consume just from one provider, but unfortunately you're only available in one region and I really need stuff in 2 or 3. You can use your infrastructure in your region location and then cross-sell the extra infrastructure we have from those other regions and keep them all inside of one platform and consuming from you and make residual income off of all of that.
Yeah, understood. Thank you very much, Joe. And thank you for, it's another new solution. It's that allows people, or that allows ISPs to compete against hyperscaler and easily get multiple region cloud, multiple region functioning working cloud for low start budget.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah,
thank you, Joe.
Thanks for letting me be here today.
Yo.
Thank you.
Cheers, bye-bye.